By the late 1600s, the European theater of witch accusations and prosecutions had entered the final act of its tragic play. Yet, ironically, despite the calamity and horror, it was during these years that the narrative of witchcraft took an unexpected turn. As we step into this dark finale, we'll see how scientific thinking started to emerge. But instead of understanding and compassion, it offered accusations and condemnation. We'll explore how the pursuit of power and control became intertwined with the witch hunts, affecting not only the accused, but the very essence of justice itself. Join us as we delve into the gripping tales of individuals like Giles Garnier, whose unjust trial and demise encapsulates the chilling reality of the Salem witch trials in America. Through these stories, we will witness the evolving perceptions of witchcraft, the influence of societal tensions, and the haunting legacy of these events that continue to captivate and horrify us today. Prepare to be transported to a world where faith and reason clashed, where lives were uprooted by suspicion, and where the concept of witchcraft became a tool to wield power, leaving an indelible mark on history. Let's move to North America. The year is 1692 and the place is Salem Village, Massachusetts. Here, in a small community marked by religious piety and simmering social tensions, the story of witchcraft and accusations was about to reach a horrifying climax. What began as whispers and rumors quickly escalated into a frenzy, forever etching the name Salem into infamy. The story began with a group of young girls who started having fits. They writhed on the floor, screamed in pain, and even seemed to be levitating. The community, deeply religious and superstitious, immediately suspected witchcraft. And the fingers pointed to Tituba, a Native American woman enslaved by one of the ministers. Accusations soon expanded to include Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, two impoverished women who were easy targets. Their misfortune and peculiar behavior made them suspects. And once the initial accusations were made, a domino effect occurred. Fearful of being accused themselves, many townspeople rushed to denounce others. Neighbors turned against neighbors, friends accused friends. And within months, over 150 people were charged with witchcraft, with hundreds more facing accusations. Mass hysteria had taken hold and the village was tearing itself apart. Amidst the chaos, Reverend Samuel Parris, the minister whose enslaved woman was among the first accused, played a pivotal role. He fanned the flames of fear, ensuring that the accusations continued to spread and intensify. His actions reflected the darker side of religion, where faith was weaponized to manipulate and control. The situation spiraled out of control as the court proceedings became a travesty of justice. Evidence was coerced, confessions extracted through torture, and spectral evidence, essentially testimony based on dreams and visions, was accepted as fact. Logic and reason were discarded in favor of fear and superstition. Individuals like Giles Garnier, a respected man in the community, found themselves ensnared by the accusations. Despite his impeccable character and the lack of concrete evidence against him, he became a victim of the frenzied climate. His trial and subsequent hanging symbolized the depths of injustice that had taken root in Salem. The darkest chapter of the Salem witch trials was the use of torture to extract confessions and gather evidence. Accused witches were subjected to excruciating physical and psychological torments. They were suspended by ropes from trees until their limbs were weakened. They were forced to stand for hours on wooden blocks. And if these didn't break them, they were pressed with heavy weights until they confessed or renounced Satan. These acts of cruelty were not seen as aberrations, but rather as necessary means to uncover the truth in a community consumed by fear. It was a descent into barbarity disguised as a pursuit of justice. But amidst this madness, glimmers of enlightenment flickered. Individuals like John Halley, a young minister, grappled with the unfolding events. Initially supportive of the trials, he eventually became a critic, recognizing the dangers of unchecked accusations and the absence of due process. However, his dissent was overshadowed by the relentless pursuit of supposed witches. Hale's struggle reflected the larger intellectual currents of the time as the scientific method and rational thinking started to challenge long-held beliefs and practices. But in Salem, such enlightenment was not enough to stem the tide of hysteria. The trials continued, destroying families, reputations, and lives. And when the accusations reached figures close to Governor William Phipps, he intervened. Recognizing the need to restore order, he established a new court to review the cases. This move marked a turning point as more rational and measured approach was brought to bear. But the damage was already done. The Salem witch trials ended with 20 people hanged and several others died awaiting trial. The trials serve as a haunting reminder of the destructive power of mass hysteria, religious extremism, and the abuse of justice. But remember, while Salem was happening, a similar frenzy was taking place in Europe. Back in Europe, the last official witch trial took place in 1782 when two women, Margaret von Waldeck and Elizabeth Katz, were executed in Basel, Switzerland. Why? For practicing witchcraft. But the narrative of witchcraft was far from over. During this period, a transformation in attitudes towards witchcraft began to occur. The idea of the witch shifted from a figure who actively practiced evil arts to someone who was misguided or deceived by the devil. Think of it like this. The earlier beliefs were more about paganism and folk magic, but with the rise of Christianity, everything changed. Healing herbs became devilish concoctions, and reading fortunes from animal entrails became satanic rituals. Even things like protective charms were twisted into curses. Suddenly, all these everyday practices were branded as witchcraft. And the worst part, people actually believed it. Some folks thought witches could cast spells for love, luck, or revenge. Others believed they could summon storms, cause illness, or even kill with a mere glance. Remember, this was a time when science was still figuring itself out. So diseases, bad weather, and accidents were blamed on witches. As the 15th century rolled around, things got crazier. Books like the Malleus Maleficarum started popping up. They were basically handbooks on how to spot a witch and what to do with them. And don't even get me started on the torture methods. Like the swimming test where they'd throw you in water to see if you floated. If you did, you were a witch. And honestly, who doesn't love a good witch trial, right? It was like the hottest gossip in town. People would crowd the streets to watch these trials. And the accused, well, let's just say they didn't have a great time. Most of the accused were women. Why? Well, misogyny was always handy, I guess. Women were seen as weaker, more emotional, and closer to the devil, according to these books. So any unusual behavior or bad thing that happened, bam, blame the women. The accusations spun out of control. Entire communities turned against each other. Families were torn apart and innocent people suffered. It was a dark, dark time. Today we know there was no real evidence of these crazy beliefs. But back then, it was hard to question what you were told. People put their own safety and security in the hands of the authorities and the church. They believed that there was a real danger lurking in their midst. After all, if the people in charge were saying witches were real and dangerous, who were we to argue? But thankfully, we've come a long way since then. We now understand that mental health issues can affect anyone regardless of gender. We recognize that accidents and illnesses happen, and we rely on science and reason to guide us. And while the darkest parts of our past can sometimes feel like distant echoes, it's crucial to remember and learn from them. The history of witches and witchcraft isn't just about broomsticks and cauldrons. It reflects humanity's capacity for fear, prejudice, and cruelty. But it also shows our resilience, our quest for knowledge, and our ability to grow and change. So keep asking questions, keep seeking answers, and above all, keep believing in the power of empathy and understanding. Who knows? Together, we might just be able to rewrite the ending of this story. For fear of being pointed at, whispering she looks suspicious, and have your neighbor dragged off to a trial for bewitching the cat population. If you needed medicine, would you risk crossing paths with a healer, lest you become their next victim? And forget about enjoying a good scare story around the fireplace. Talking about folklore and fairy tales was a slippery slope to getting branded a heretic. This was life in a world on edge, where everyday life became a high-stakes game of hot potato. And when your skin was the texture of parchment and sleep was a luxury you couldn't afford, you understood just how frail your reality had become. While others saw political gain or financial opportunity in this witch craze, there were those who became trapped in its web of accusations. Let's meet a few of them. First, we have Isabella di Vitara. Born in Venice in 1488, her life seemed like a promising start to a Renaissance romance novel. She married well, giving birth to 5 children while rubbing elbows with the elite at parties. But then the accusations began. Her husband was a tax collector. He was efficient, some said. Ruthless, others claimed. And when farmers found their crops failing or livestock dying, they blamed him. Allegedly, he had bewitched them. But when Isabella and her husband were charged, she quickly confessed to practicing witchcraft. She named her sister Caterina as her accomplice, and she was off to the gallows. Then there's Katharina Born. By the 1580s, this Austrian noblewoman was a widow with 6 children. Like many aristocrats, she held court at her home, meeting with influential neighbors. But when the king decided to appoint a new imperial countess, Catherine was out. Suddenly, she found herself living on a small estate. And soon after, she was accused of witchcraft, allegedly using her knowledge of healing herbs to harm her maid. Forced to stand trial in Prague, Catherine denied everything, which made the judge suspicious. He believed she was hiding her face under her veil, so he pulled it off, declaring her a witch. Moments later, she was dead. But let's not forget Martha Carrier. When the Massachusetts Bay Colony was founded in 1629, Martha was there. But as the years passed, things changed. She was poor, unmarried, and most shocking of all, independent. She ran her own tavern, even attending church services, but rumors swirled. People claimed she had cursed them. When 2 young girls began acting strangely, Martha was accused of afflicting them. On April 1693, she was tried. She denied wrongdoing, but the jury saw things differently. A few months later, she was hanged. And these are just 3 stories. Thousands more played out across continents. These weren't just names in a history book. They were mothers, sisters, daughters, neighbors. They were also scapegoats. You see, witchcraft wasn't just a crime, it was a convenient tool. When times were hard, a witch was easy to blame. Crops failed, people accused witches. A king needed money, witches volunteered themselves to be sacrificed so that the weather would improve. A tavern owner got robbed, a witch must have cast a curse on them. It was a ready-made explanation, taking the complexity out of misfortune. In a way, these folks were right. There was a curse, but it wasn't cast by old women stirring cauldrons. It was cast by society itself, a curse of ignorance, of fear, of judging others without understanding. And the worst part is it still goes on today. In 2021, 16 people were murdered in Indonesia on the suspicion of witchcraft. So let's take a closer look at what happened to these folks. First, we have Isabella de Vetra. Her confession cleared her husband, but it put her in danger. She was stripped naked, thrown into prison, and locked up for 3 days. Then came the torture. To exact a confession, they pulled on her nipples, jammed pins into her arms, and shoved needles under her fingernails. Eventually, she agreed to name co-conspirators. Later, she recanted, saying under duress she named 17 innocent people. Those 17 faced arrest, imprisonment, and in some cases death. Finally, on December 1497, Isabella died under the hangman's axe. Next, there's Katerina Schan. After Catherine's trial, her family did everything they could to protect her children. But when the kids started claiming their mother had bewitched them, their fate was sealed. 4 daughters, along with the family midwife, were convicted. The eldest daughter, Regina, bravely proclaimed her mother's innocence, insisting the charges were retribution for her father's decision to leave the Catholic Church, but that didn't help. They were all beheaded. Only 2 sons escaped, leaving the family tree stunted and stained with suspicion. Then we have Martha Carrier. While awaiting trial, she spent time in a prison cell, slowly losing her sanity. Her lawyer argued that the accusations were based on superstition and hearsay, but it didn't work. Martha was seen as a threat, an outsider causing unrest. After her execution, though, doubts arose. Reverend John Halley began speaking out, warning of false accusations. And in 1697, the colony even offered compensation to families of those convicted. It was too little, too late for Martha. But the question remains, would you believe a witch hunt if you saw one? Or maybe a better question is, do you already believe one? Just think about it. If someone tells you they can cure your headache with a herbal remedy, does that make them a quack or a witch doctor? If your grandma says she can tell the future by reading your tea leaves, are you impressed or afraid? When someone claims to have powers, you have to decide whether to believe them, investigate further, or tune them out. The same goes for witch hunts. Do you listen to the loudest accusers or consider those who seem reasonable? Do you jump to conclusions or gather facts before forming an opinion? Your response matters. After all, history has shown that when fear and power collide, truth often gets burned at the stake. In the end, the witch hunt mania shows us how far fear and desperation can push us. When faced with uncertainty, some seek scapegoats, twisting superstitions into weapons. Accusations become a self-fulfilling prophecy, fueling the fire of fear. We see that in Martha Carrier's story. She was an outcast, different from the rest, and that made her vulnerable. In a society struggling with its own problems, finding a culprit is easy. All it takes is a rumor, a whisper, a single seed of doubt. Then comes the rush to judgment, sacrificing truth at the altar of expediency. We witness this in Isabella de Vetra's case. Faced with torture, she confessed, naming innocent people in the hopes of saving herself. But in doing so, she became part of the problem, feeding a system that thrived on fear and deception. Yet, amidst the darkness, we find glimmers of hope. In Catherine Bourne's tale, we see resistance. Despite being stripped of her title and position, she stood firm, refusing to accept guilt she didn't have. Her denial may have been seen as suspicious, but it was a testament to her spirit, a quiet act of defiance against a system intent on silencing her. The witch hunt mania reminds us that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from grand conspiracies, but from ordinary people succumbing to fear and prejudice. When we allow suspicion to fester, it becomes a poison that consumes reason and justice. The lessons of these stories aren't confined to history books. They're a mirror reflecting our own capacity for cruelty and our responsibility to uphold truth. It's a call to be vigilant, to question, to resist, and above all, to remember that in the face of fear, courage is always the most potent antidote. What's the craziest thing you've ever heard someone claim happened to them? And do you know anyone who's been accused of something unbelievable? We're eager to hear your experiences. Also, please subscribe to support our channel. It means a lot to us. This is a special series where big events are broken down into small moments. Check out the other episodes. For centuries, people across the world were put on trial for a crime that didn't exist. In fact, the very definition of this crime varied from place to place, from person to person. For a while, almost anyone could be accused of it. Mostly these accusations fell on women, particularly those who seemed different. If something bad happened in a village, they looked for a scapegoat. Women like Alice Hopkins. In 1645, Alice lived in the town of Guilford, Connecticut, a Puritan settlement in what is today the United States. At the time, witchcraft was a very serious accusation. Just 3 years earlier, 14 women and 1 man were killed for practicing witchcraft in Salem, Massachusetts. And in 1645, a lot of people in Guilford believed witchcraft was real. Alice, however, did not believe that she was a witch, though she had been accused of witchcraft before and probably saw the writing on the wall. But in 1645, 2 girls in her neighborhood began having seizures, screaming and contorting themselves. And her neighbors believed that she was casting spells on them. Authorities questioned her and she denied everything, saying that she had never practiced witchcraft. But that didn't matter. She was put on trial anyway. Most of the proceedings centered around the testimony of the 2 girls who claimed that Alice had cast spells on them. No physical evidence was ever introduced, but despite her protests, Alice was convicted. What happened next is unknown. Court records show that she was sentenced to prison, but it's unclear if she survived her imprisonment or how long she spent in jail. Her story might seem tragic, but it wasn't unique. It wasn't even unusual. Between 1450 and 1750, more than 100,000 Europeans were accused of witchcraft and 50,000 of them were executed. Of course, that's just a statistic. Behind every witch trial was a name, a face, a voice silenced. It's easy to talk in numbers, thousands accused, hundreds burned, dozens tortured. But today, let's set aside the statistics and talk about the real people. The ones dragged from their homes, thrown into dungeons, tortured until they confessed to crimes that never happened, and executed, all because someone whispered the word, witch. Let's begin with one of the most famous victims of all, Agness Sampson. Agness was a respected midwife and healer in 16th century Scotland. She was known for her knowledge of herbs and childbirth, not exactly the stuff of black magic. But during the North Berwick witch trials in 1590, she was accused of using sorcery to cause a storm that nearly sank the ship of King James VI. Yes, a storm, on the sea. During Scottish weather, clearly witchcraft. Agnes was arrested, tortured, and forced to confess. They shaved all the hair from her body to find the witch's mark, a spot insensitive to pain, supposedly where the devil had kissed her. When she was finally brought before the king himself, she gave a calm and detailed confession. The kind of confession one gives after days of agony and no hope. She was strangled, then burned. Her ashes blew into the North Sea. Now let's meet Anna Göldi, sometimes called the last witch of Europe. It was 1782. The Enlightenment had already swept through much of Europe. Science, reason, and tolerance were supposed to be the new order of the day. But in Switzerland, old habits died hard. Anna was a maid in the household of a prominent doctor. When the doctor's daughter began vomiting pins and having seizures, the family blamed Anna. She was arrested and accused of placing curses with bread and milk. Under torture, she confessed to being in league with Satan. The court couldn't legally try her for witchcraft. It had technically been abolished. So instead they convicted her of poisoning the girl with magic and executed her by sword. It was witch hunting in disguise. Centuries later, the Swiss government would apologize and officially exonerate her. A nice gesture. A little late. Now imagine you're not even an adult, just a teenager or even a child, and someone accuses you. That's exactly what happened to Barbara Dunk, a young woman in early 19th century Poland. The town she lived in caught fire, and people needed someone to blame. She was a maid, poor, unmarried, and had a reputation for being strange. Boom, witch, she was blamed for setting the fire using magical powers. In 1811, yes, 1811, she was burned alive. One of the last confirmed legal executions for witchcraft in Europe. These women weren't demons or sorceresses. They were midwives, herbalists, caregivers, sometimes just eccentric or disliked. Some were poor, some were outspoken. Many were widows or childless women without male protection in a patriarchal society. Easy targets. And while women made up the majority of victims, they weren't the only ones. Meet Urbain Grandier, a French Catholic priest burned at the stake in 1634. His crime? Allegedly using witchcraft to seduce nuns and possess them with demons. In reality, he had enemies in high places and refused to toe the church's political line. So when a group of nuns claimed they were tormented by spirits, guess who they accused? Despite his repeated denials and lack of solid evidence, Grandier was found guilty, tortured, burned. His case became one of the most infamous examples of how witch hunts were often just politics in disguise, a way to eliminate opponents while wearing a cross around your neck. Even children weren't spared. In Würzburg, Germany, during one of the largest witch hunts in history, dozens of children were executed. Some were accused of being the offspring of witches. Others were said to have seen spirits or been caught playing suspicious games. Children, some as young as 7, were tortured until they named others, including their own parents. This wasn't justice, it was a machine. Once set in motion, it didn't stop. It needed names, confessions, firewood. So who were these people who faced such horrific ends? Well, there was a lot of variety in the ranks of the accused. For example, there was Margaret Murray, a widow living in the Scottish lowlands in the early 1700s. According to the official account of her trial, she had used witchcraft to harm her neighbors and spread disease. There was also Janet and Christian Device, 2 sisters accused of consorting with Satan and using their demonic powers to lure men into the wilderness and eat their flesh. Then there was Isabella di Caransebes, a Hungarian countess who dabbled in fortune-telling and healing. But who were the accusers? Who sent these people to their deaths? The answer is complicated. Sometimes accusations came from people who genuinely believed that witchcraft was real and that someone was using it against them. Other times, they came from people who wanted to punish someone they didn't like. And sometimes they came from people who were trying to protect themselves. Fear of witchcraft was so widespread that if you didn't believe in it, you had to work extra hard to prove that you didn't. And the best way to do that was to accuse others of witchcraft. After all, if someone accused you of witchcraft and you denied it, you looked guilty. You had nothing to fear if you were innocent, right? To defend yourself, you had to condemn others. To understand why so many people fell victim to these kinds of accusations, it helps to know what life was like in the era of the witch craze. First of all, life was hard. Living standards declined in many parts of Europe between 1450 and 1750, and warfare was common. People were desperate for explanations for sickness, misfortune, and death, and witchcraft offered a convenient culprit. Religion was also a major factor. During the Protestant Reformation, which began in the early 1500s, traditional hierarchies were being challenged. People started questioning the role of priests and the validity of sacraments. And in this climate, ordinary people were eager to find a way to assert their own spiritual authority. Accusing someone of witchcraft was a way to claim power over the supernatural. It was a way to say, I see what you're doing and I will stop you. Finally, you have to consider misogyny. Male domination of female bodies and land was a critical part of European society, and women who didn't behave properly were threatening. They could be punished for being too loud, too independent, or too successful. Accusing them of witchcraft was a way to silence them and ensure that they stayed in their place. Now, let's talk about why and how this madness eventually came to an end. In Part 4, we'll look at how the madness finally began to die down. Who challenged the witch trials, what changed public opinion, and why, even today, echoes of the witch hunts still haunt our laws, our fears, and our culture. So we ask again, how did the witch hunts end? Well, by the late 1600s, the fires of the witch hunts had burned for centuries. Entire generations grew up knowing that a wrong look, a bad dream, or a jealous neighbor could mean the end of your life. But slowly, painfully, almost reluctantly, the hysteria began to fade. It didn't vanish overnight. The system didn't wake up one day and go, wait, this is insane. No, it took the courage of skeptics, the rise of science, and the weight of public exhaustion to begin extinguishing a blaze that had consumed tens of thousands of lives. Let's talk about why it started to slow down and who helped push it. First, there was something new spreading across Europe, the Enlightenment. The 17th and 18th centuries were buzzing with ideas. Scientists, philosophers, and even some daring theologians began questioning everything from the divine right of kings to the very laws of nature. People like Galileo, Descartes, and Newton weren't trying to save accused witches. They were trying to explain the world without magic. And that, unintentionally, struck at the heart of witch trial logic. If illness was caused by bacteria, not demons, then healers weren't witches. If lightning was caused by electricity, not curses, then storms weren't proof of devilry. If you could measure the laws of gravity and time, maybe you didn't need to accuse your neighbor of flying on a broomstick. As science rose, superstition began to wobble, but reason alone wasn't enough. People had believed in witches for centuries. Changing that mindset took direct confrontation with the absurdity of the trials. Enter skeptics, brave individuals who spoke out against the madness even when it was dangerous to do so. One of the earliest was Johann Weyer, a Dutch physician in the 1500s who wrote The Deception of Demons. He argued that most accused witches were actually mentally ill or simply old women being bullied. He was laughed at, of course, but his ideas planted a seed. Then there was Reginald Scott, an Englishman who published The Discovery of Witchcraft in 1584. He boldly claimed that witches weren't real, that the trials were based on nonsense, and that belief in magic was a form of dangerous ignorance. King James I, the same king obsessed with witchcraft, was so furious he ordered all copies of the book burned. Still, the idea was out there. What if the witch hunts were a mistake? As the 1600s rolled into the 1700s, more thinkers began agreeing. Even some judges grew uneasy. The confessions extracted under torture were clearly unreliable. The evidence, birthmarks, dreams, accusations under duress, fell apart under scrutiny. One landmark moment came in Salem, Massachusetts. We already saw in Part 2 how the Salem witch trials spiraled into chaos in 1692, but just as quickly as they flared up, they collapsed. Why? Because the public started to realize they had gone too far. When respected citizens, including a former minister's wife, were sentenced to death, people began questioning the court. Some of the girls who made accusations recanted. Judges apologized, one even resigned in shame. By 1693, the remaining accused were released. In the following decades, survivors and families of the dead received public apologies, financial compensation, and eventually exoneration. It wasn't perfect, it didn't undo the damage, but it was a sign the spell of fear could be broken. Across Europe, similar cracks formed. In England, the last execution for witchcraft happened in 1685. By 1736, the British Parliament officially repealed all witchcraft laws. France followed suit, then Germany, then the rest of the continent. Slowly, the laws were undone. Trials became rare. Executions stopped. But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't mercy. This was embarrassment. The Enlightenment had exposed the irrationality of the hunts. Scholars mocked the idea of flying witches and demonic packs. What had once been justice now looked like mass hysteria and murder. Governments wanted to save face. The church wanted to move on. The world wanted to forget. But some countries took far longer. In parts of Eastern Europe and Scandinavia, witchcraft laws stayed on the books well into the 18th and even 19th centuries. Isolated communities clung to old beliefs. In Poland, as late as 1793, women were still being executed for witchcraft. In Switzerland, Anna Göldi was killed in 1782. We met her in Part 3, wrongly accused. Tortured and executed while newspapers were already printing Enlightenment essays, so what finally ended it? Not one event, but a wave of change. Printing and journalism made trials public and open to ridicule. Rising legal standards demanded real evidence, not rumor. Public outrage grew as people saw friends, mothers, and children killed for nonsense. Secular governments started separating law from religion. And eventually, the courts stopped listening to ghost stories. But here's the catch. The end of the witch hunts didn't erase the damage. Whole towns had been wiped out. Generations lived in terror. Thousands of innocent people, mostly women, were erased from history or remembered only as witches. Even worse, the ideas behind the hunts, fear of women, fear of outsiders, belief in dangerous others, never truly went away. Which brings us to our final chapter. In Part 5, we'll explore how the legacy of the witch hunt still lives on. Not in black cats or pointy hats, but in the way society still marginalizes, demonizes, and controls. The fire may be out, but the smoke never fully cleared. Now, we know there are some folks out there who believe the witch hunts were totally justified. They might say, hey, if these women were really flying on broomsticks and casting spells, they deserved whatever they got. But let's think about that for a second. If those same people were accused of, say, growing magical plants or having secret healing knowledge, would they also be persecuted? Of course not. That stuff is considered normal today. So what does that tell us? It tells us that persecuting people for their beliefs or their differences is never okay. Just because someone's beliefs are different doesn't make them harmful. And it's not okay to use fear and ignorance to take away someone else's rights or even their life. Remember the real victims of the witch hunts. They trusted their neighbors and their leaders, but those very people turned on them in a moment, accusing them of terrible crimes they didn't commit. Today, we have a responsibility to stand up for what's right and speak out against injustice whenever we see it, just like many brave individuals did during the witch hunts. These were ordinary people who refused to be silent when they knew something was wrong. They faced danger and sometimes death, but they didn't back down. So next time you hear someone making excuses for persecuting innocent people, remember those who fought against the witch hunts. Their courage helps us all stand up for what's right, and it's a reminder that we can always do better. We should listen to those who have been silenced for too long and stand up for those who are being treated unfairly. If you enjoyed this series, please hit the like button and share it with your friends. Your support means the world to us. Thanks for joining us on this journey through time. The fires stopped burning. The courts grew quiet. The stakes were packed away, and just like that, the witch hunts ended. Or did they? Because while no one's being legally burned at the stake today, the logic, the fear, and the prejudice that fueled the witch hunts. They never really left. They just changed shape. And if you look closely in our culture, our politics, and our collective memory, you'll find the ashes still warm. This is a series we made because sometimes knowing the past is hard, it hurts, it confronts us with ugly truths. But ignoring it only lets those truths fester. So we made this series to bring them to light. It's called The Devil is in the Details. Let's start with the cultural ghost of the witch. Once a real accusation that ended lives, witch is now a word we toss around casually. Halloween costumes, cartoons, fairy tales, old women with crooked noses and cauldrons. We turned a historical horror into children's entertainment. Now, this isn't inherently bad. Reclaiming symbols can be powerful. Many women today proudly call themselves witches as a way to connect with nature, feminism, or ancestral traditions. But the sanitized, silly image of a witch hides the brutal truth. Real people died for that word. And behind every cartoon hat is a history of torture, misogyny, and fear. But more dangerous than cultural memory is social memory, or rather, amnesia. Most people today don't learn about the witch hunts in detail. It's a footnote in textbooks, a trivia question. But we should remember that it was ordinary people, not monsters, who carried out these horrors. Neighbors, clergy, judges, townsfolk. The witch hunts were under dark spell. They were the logical result of fear plus authority plus silence, and that combination, still very much alive. Let's talk about modern witch hunts, metaphorical and real. Today, we still target those who don't fit. Women who speak up too much are labeled crazy, hysterical, or toxic. Marginalized groups are blamed for economic or social problems. Whistleblowers are punished, not praised. Online mobs destroy reputations with a tweet instead of a torch. In parts of the world, literal witch hunts still happen. Yes, in the 21st century. In countries like India, Tanzania, Papua New Guinea, and parts of rural Africa, people, especially elderly women, are accused of witchcraft and killed. Often it's about land disputes, local politics, or fear of disease. The script is the same. Someone suffers, no one understands why, and someone gets blamed. They're beaten, banished, burned in Ghana, for example. There are still witch camps, places where women accused of sorcery are exiled for their own protection. It's a medieval punishment with a modern twist. We might like to think we're more advanced now, but in many parts of the world, the witch hunt never ended. Even in places without literal accusations, the pattern repeats. Fear plus misunderstanding plus power equals scapegoating. During the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, gay men were treated like witches, blamed for disease, shunned, demonized. During pandemics, we blame immigrants. During political turmoil, we blame activists, journalists, or enemies of the people. When we don't understand something, we still reach for the pitchfork. And what about gender? The witch hunts were fundamentally a war against women, against knowledge, independence, healing, and resistance. That war has just gone digital now. Women in leadership, science, or media still face a barrage of threats, harassment, and demonization, often for simply existing with confidence. Call it what you want, the methods may have changed, but the intent hasn't. Even the legal systems today carry echoes of the past. Forced confessions still happen. People are still imprisoned or executed with flimsy evidence. Justice systems in many countries still favor those in power and punish the powerless. And let's not forget the weaponization of religion. Back then, the church said it was saving souls. Today, some still use religion to justify controlling women's bodies, denying rights, and silencing dissent. The excuse is different, the control is the same. So why study the witch hunts at all? Because they show us what fear does when it's given power. They remind us that justice without truth is dangerous, and that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Because they force us to ask, who are today's scapegoats? Who benefits from the fear we spread? Who is being silenced, and why? The history of witch hunts isn't just a creepy bedtime story. It's a warning. A reminder that cruelty doesn't always wear a villain's face. Sometimes it looks like a priest or a judge, or a neighbor, or a smiling official who says, "We're doing this for your own good." But more importantly, the story of the witch hunts is a call to empathy, to look at the person being accused, judged, exiled, and ask, what if it were me? Or your mother, your sister, your daughter? Because once upon a time, all it took was being the wrong kind of woman in the wrong place, at the wrong time, and the world would light the match. So remember their names. Not just the Agness, Sampsons, Goddess, or Grandiers, but the thousands of nameless, voiceless souls who died in smoke and silence, accused of nothing more than being inconvenient. The fires may be out, but it's up to us to make sure they never get lit again. And hey, thank you for sticking with us until the end. Why? Because the real ending of the witch hunts isn't a day in history. It's every day we choose empathy over fear, evidence over accusation, and kindness over cruelty. That's the ending we write every day. So if you like this kind of content, please do share this with your friends. It helps us keep making more. See you next time.